Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gill Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gill@eapen.info. My guest today is Professor J. Swaminathan, who is the Professor of Operations and Faculty Director of the ReThinc Value Chains Lab at the Kenan-Flagler Business School at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is a Distinguished Fellow of the Institute of Operations Research and Management Science, Manufacturing and Service Operations Management Society, and Production and Operations Management Society. His work with UNICEF provided impetus for changes in the global supply chain planning. Welcome, Jay.
Well, thank you, Gail, for inviting me to this podcast today.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to maybe touch on a few of your papers, recent papers, and one of them is entitled Carrot or Stick, Supply Diversity and Its Impact on Carbon Emission Reduction Strategies, where you examine consequences of knowledge sharing and monitoring-based governance strategies on emission reduction. And so you're looking at how engaged the suppliers and buyers are in the supply chain and how they share information and how that might impact in the overall carbon footprint.
Yeah, so this is a study that is looking at carbon footprint reduction in overall. And if you think about green supply chains or carbon footprint reduction, you can put it into three categories: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Mm-hmm. And so, there have been a number of studies done around the fact that the Scope 1 and Scope 2 reductions, which are typically around what a firm is doing within its own four walls, as well as in some of the strategies that it might have in terms of its operations and logistics, yeah, that amount is actually quite limited. So most of the firms recognize that in today's world, we are in a highly integrated global supply chain environment, and a lot of carbon footprint reduction is going to come from Scope 3.
Yeah.
And Scope 3 looks at not only your operations, but it also looks at operations of your suppliers and their suppliers and so on. So this study, we're looking at we've created a kind of a unique data set combining multiple data sets that are available out there. So one of them is the Carbon Disclosure Project from Europe, CDP, and they have been conducting surveys with the leading manufacturers all over the world, actually leading firms all over the world, about various things, including asking them about what are the kinds of things they are doing with their suppliers, what has been their focus, how do they measure suppliers' carbon footprint reduction, do they have policies, do they have incentives? And so they have this type of survey that is going on for a few years. We also coupled that with another data set called FactSet, which has information about the key suppliers for a given firm.
Yeah.
And one other data set that we connected with, which kind of measures the hardcore numbers around how well the companies are doing in terms of their own carbon footprint reduction efforts. So this study, what it tries to do, so it's a kind of a unique first in kind of a class kind of study, where the idea is to say that supply chains are complex, and firms are trying their very best to reduce the carbon footprint in their scope 3 world. Now, what is the role of supplier diversity?
Yeah.
In terms of the policies and in terms of the mechanisms that these firms are ending up using. So what we do in this study is to kind of, here's where we use some artificial intelligence to do some text processing and kind of do some new methods around identifying and classifying the firms in terms of their policies. And we kind of put them into kind of two types of buckets.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe three buckets, I would say. Doing not much in a very, kind of a concrete manner. And then the second bucket is doing things more in terms of, a stick approach, which is basically saying, hey, we need so much reduction. What have you done with respect to that? We have a scorecard, we monitor that scorecard and so on. And then the third one is more of like both the carrot and a stick kind of approach, which is more of like knowledge sharing, having symposia, working with the suppliers, going to the supplier plants, taking a look at how they are, performing and helping them out and in terms of innovation around green. And what we find is kind of interesting in the sense that the key message in that paper is to say that how diverse your supply base is in terms of two dimensions, right? One is geographical and second is industrial, right? So depending on how diverse your supply base is, firms, at least in the data set that we have been looking at, seem to adopt one or the other in a kind of a conscious manner, right? So one could think about it this way, right? If everybody in your supply base all are from the same region.
Yeah.
Let's say all your suppliers are in China, or all in suppliers are in India, all in suppliers in Mexico. Then the strategy adopted by such a firm, the same firm, the strategy would be very different when you have, say, one supplier each in each of these geographical regions.
Right.
And the reason for that is obviously because of the level of awareness and the level of technology and the level of government scrutiny each of the suppliers might face in these different regions, right? So that's one angle, and we kind of, actually look at that, in a carefully analyzed, statistical methods approach to kind of, identify that effect. The other reason for this difference to happen could be when you think about the diversity across multiple industries. So if you're a very focused company and you're only dealing with certain types of suppliers, say you're Walmart, and you have all types of suppliers in your list, your strategies are going to be different, right? It's going to be a lot more easier in terms of monitoring when you have less number of suppliers, and maybe they're less diverse because you can have scorecards that make sense for everybody. But as these things increase, then you tend to see that as the complexity in the supply base increases, you see more and more firms actually going and working with their suppliers in a more dedicated fashion.
Yeah, so there are two things in the paper, it looks like to me, Jay. One is the diversity of the suppliers, so both geographical and industrial diversity. And the other is engaging suppliers, right? So higher levels of engagement, information sharing appears to have a positive effect. Um, it's a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that when you have a very large and diverse supplier base, sometimes it's difficult to engage with them in a consistent way, right?
Yes.
So I wondered, what's causing these two things to be both beneficial?
Yeah, I mean that's a big challenge, which is basically as your diversity of the supply base
Yeah.
increases, right? You now have to get more creative. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, if you use just a straightforward, scorecard kind of approach, then you know that single scorecard may or may not fit the whole population.
Right.
Rather, if you now started doing things which are maybe a little bit more, I would call it as softer in nature, right? So maybe you host a webinar and you invite all the major suppliers with whom you want to have some kind of a milestone achieved. And then, even though they're all diverse, they're all coming from different industries, they might have something to share from each other's success stories,
Right.
which then again can help you in terms of pushing those boundaries.
Okay.
So it's not very straightforward, and that's why this is kind of interesting what the data pans out.
Yeah, so I want to jump into another paper that you have. It's entitled Customer Learning in Call Centers from Previous Waiting Experiences. So here you're looking at, the call centers and the callers into the call centers, their patience and their abandonment behavior. And the callers, repeating callers are learning from their experiences from the past, and that changes their behavior. So what you're suggesting here, I think, is that you can develop some sort of an algorithm that can be sort of personalized intervention for a caller, right? So that the firm doesn't lose the caller through abandonment.
Yeah, so this is actually a fascinating piece of data set that we were able to get, where we have this data set which tracks whether when the caller called, and this is for in the banking sector,
Yeah.
and then how long did they wait? Did they abandon? So it's a kind of an interesting study because thus far what people have been using is that, well, in these types of studies, what they try to do is to say, well, there is a rational equilibrium that comes up because callers actually know most of the things about the distribution of the waiting times, and then they behave in a certain way in terms of solving their own maximization optimal stopping problem, and so I think this is the first piece of work which actually kind of tries to even go there and to say, do callers really know what's going on?
Yeah.
And then based on the data, if they were rational agents, so we have a structural model here around what a caller might be doing. And so the way we do this study is to have a structural model around caller behavior, where we assume the caller comes in with a prior belief around the waiting time distribution. And we use a Bayesian framework just because it's easier to analyze, and we basically and the data fits that quite well in terms of how it pans out eventually. But every interaction that a customer has with the call center they update these belief parameters.
Yeah.
So what we actually end up showing here is that indeed, so first thing that one wants to ask is, do they actually learn anything?
Right.
And basically what we show is that, they are learning. They are learning. And we can actually see that they are learning, which means if they have a longer wait, then they actually update that.
Yeah.
If they obviously this is a truncated kind of distribution where, right. If you balk and leave the system, then you don't know how long the wait could have been, but you only see the truncation, right?
Yeah.
So as a customer, you're only updating your wait times based on your experience. So what we actually find is that the customers are learning. And what is more interesting is because we have a structural model, now we can actually use the previous interactions of the customer to have a model that will predict what is their current estimates.
Yeah.
And depending on that, we can actually do what we want to do. Now, what we want to do could be different for different companies. Some of them might want to say, hey, you know what? John has been waiting in the system for a long time. He has he's a good customer of ours, and this is something that we need to change. Okay, let's put him ahead in the queue this time. So he's going to update his wait times. The flip side of it could be that the company looks at John and goes, oh, John is not one of our best customers anyway. Let's make him wait a little bit longer. Anyway, he expects to wait long. So let's just, so there could be some of that. So we're not prescribing in this particular study what to do with that estimate.
Yeah.
But what we are basically saying is that through data, we can actually estimate this, and we can demonstrate that indeed there is actually learning behavior from the customers who are coming to the call center.
Yeah. So, presumably, one could implement some sort of an AI algorithm that can learn the customer, how long the customer is likely to wait, and optimize the scheduling process. But it's also, like you say, could have some sort of a conditioning effect on the customer too. So it could be a cat and mouse game. Once the customer finds out this is the parameters the algorithm is using, the customer could actually train the algorithm over time too. So it could be a cat and mouse game ultimately.
Yes, and the only difference is that that could play out, but I think the main challenge for an individual customer would be that, as opposed to the AI system, which this AI system is going to see all the customers,
right.
So it's going to learn faster. For the individual customer, their learning is based on the interactions they have had with the system.
Yeah.
So the data points might be a little bit, lower in numbers.
Right.
So that could be the estimations and the the effectiveness of such an approach.
Yeah.
Might be limited by it.
Right. Yeah, I want to jump into another a different area altogether, Jay. So this paper is entitled "Netmeter Distributed Renewable Energy: A Peril for Utilities." So electricity end users have been increasingly generating their own electricity via rooftop solar panels. And the conventional wisdom is that distributed renewable energy, when you net meter that, essentially the customer is selling excess energy back to the utility when they're not using it. The conventional wisdom is that it is actually a bad thing for the utility. Their profits will decline in the process, right? But you find something different?
Yeah. So, we do find something different, right? So this is actually again, a fascinating study using, advanced modeling as well as data from real life to estimate some of these parameters. Fundamentally, what we are saying is the following, right? So everybody, knows about net metering, where basically a customer puts a panel on the rooftop, and then the utility ends up providing some kind of a rebate to the customer, either based on the wholesale price that they are buying the electricity from, or the retail price, which is what they are charging to the customer.
Yeah.
And the fundamental idea there is to say, you know what, this is good for the conventional wisdom is that this is good for the environment, and this is, that's a reason to do it, even though the utilities might not benefit from it. So if you look at all over the US, different states have got different types of arrangements, whether it's wholesale or retail. There are groups that are lobbying to stop net metering because it could be detrimental to the existing utilities business model.
Right.
So in that backdrop, so this study, what it does is it actually looks at the holistic, all those analyses that have been done and have come up with these recommendations, completely ignore the supply side market for wholesale electricity purchase. So what happened for most of the companies which are supplying electricity is that they are purchasing a good amount of the electricity in the wholesale market.
Yeah.
So when you take that wholesale market dynamics into account, as you add more people into your net metering account here, it has two effects, right? One is obviously your demand that you need for your electricity in your region goes down, right? Because more people have net meter. So
They're sort of more people installing the panels, they become self-sufficient. They have excess energy.
So in some sense, the impact of that is that, hey, on one hand, my demand goes down, so I cannot sell as much. And that's the idea that people have been talking about, saying why it's not good for the utility. On the other hand, it also has an impact on the wholesale market, because your demand now across the wholesale market goes down as well,
right?
Because you don't need as much, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, the prices in the wholesale market will drop. And actually, now you as a utility start procuring those units of electricity at a much cheaper price. And therefore, that effect, if it dominates, then what happens is that what we find is there are thresholds in the population in terms of adoption.
Yeah.
So that as long as you are below that adoption level for net metering, it's actually beneficial for the utility. It's only when you go like maybe very high level of adoption in the markets that you're serving that you're going to have a detrimental effect. So what we actually, it's a policy paper, it's basically what we're saying here is that net metering is not necessarily a bad thing for utilities. One should actually think about all the benefits that are coming through it, of course, in terms of greenness and energy and so on and so forth, but also for the utilities. And there is a threshold beyond which actually the utilities might suffer. So one might argue that what one wants to do here is to look at, caps rather than yes-no kind of thing, saying that, maybe let's have a legislation that caps the amount of net meter clients in a region. And it's interesting because some of the utilities in some of the states seem to be doing this in a kind of a procedural manner.
Yeah.
Because if you have to get the net meter in your house, and you have to go a lot of hoops, you have to go through the city, and then you have to go through the utility, and so on and so forth. And what happens is that many a times, this restricts the number of people who are actually going to go into the system.
Right. So if I understand this correctly, Jay, if you draw a curve with adoption rate on the x-axis and utilities profits on the y-axis, we should see somewhat of an inverted U type function, right?
Yeah. It's an inverted U function. That's what we show in the paper.
Yeah. So from a utilities perspective, then they, from a policy perspective, they have, like you said, threshold adoption rate. Till then, they should actually encourage customers to put solar panels. And beyond that, they may want to discourage further
Yes.
adoption. It's kind of interesting, I recently acquired an electric car, and the utility actually said they will fund the charging station, provided they have control over that. Meaning they will essentially charge the car when they find it's optimum to charge the car. And I suspect this is sort of the next wave of optimization that utilities could start thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you know what is happening now with the net metering, as well as some of the other approaches in the energy sector, is now we have a lot more data
Yeah.
around usage, and that data can actually now be optimized for the benefit of the customer as well as for the benefit of the utility, and it could also be used for the benefit of the environment, depending on what is the criteria, the objective that the utility might have.
Right. Yeah. It's going to probably become more of a complex equation as customers start to create or buy storage equipment as well. So they could then be, making decisions whether to sell the excess energy or store it, and ultimately, the optimization of that network could change quite dramatically if that's the case.
Exactly. So in the net metering approach, also that's basically how we model it, saying that you generate your own electricity, and if your electricity is generated is greater than your needs, you can put it back onto the grid.
Right. Right.
And most of the times, customers do find it to be convenient to put it on the grid. Just because of the difference, because it's either the retail price. Sometimes they might decide to store, which we are not seeing yet, but I think industrial customers might do that. This is mostly for the residential piece. But I get what you're saying, which is basically if you have the opportunity to just take that excess electricity and then start storing it, you may decide to do that rather than putting it onto the grid at a lower price.
Yeah,
You see?
and that curve will shift. So the storage,
Yeah.
if you get higher levels of electric vehicle adoption, an electric vehicle is basically a storage of electricity, right?
Yeah.
So if a large percentage of the customers have electric vehicles, then you have distributed storage as well. And so generally, I think from your paper, there is a sort of a complex question for utilities to solve to maximize profits, and it's a dynamic question as adoption rate changes, both in terms of production as well as storage. Sounds to me. Yeah.
Exactly.
Another quick one, Jay. So you have a paper, Blockchain Adoption for Combating Deceptive Counterfeits. And this is talking about manufactured goods and how blockchain could be adopted there.
Yeah, so this piece of work looks at the potential for blockchain. One of the benefits of blockchain is obviously you can track items and then you can trace them and you can get end-to-end visibility in theory. And so one of people have been asking, beyond just financial applications in fintech, what are some of the operational or supply chain type applications of blockchain?
Yeah.
So one area that is kind of beginning to become popular or mainstream, or we are seeing more pilots in industry, is around counterfeiting and how a manufacturer, OEM in this particular case, can think about implementing blockchain as an approach that could prevent or reduce counterfeiting in the market. So the idea is the following, right? So typically, how do firms prevent counterfeiting for products in the marketplace?
Yeah.
They might do one of two strategies, right? So one is they might say, well, I have branded products. That means I have really expensive, so I do it through pricing. So counterfeiter, will not play that game because then those prices will look too exorbitant. And so, and customers will figure out which product is the real one and which is the counterfeit one based on my price signaling. That is one approach. The other approach is to say, I develop some customized way by which I can kind of signal to the customer that this is a real product. So I might put my own showrooms in there, where I just sell only directly to the customer, like Apple was doing in the beginning, right? So make sure that there's nothing that can be changed in the process. They basically do it to go direct to the customer, get all the needs of the customer, and then you have complete confidence. Or you could do something some other people have started doing, what we call as this approach. And an authorized dealership is another step in that same direction, but maybe not as aggressive as going direct, is to have your distribution channel that is completely authorized, and anytime you buy anything from any of these people, then that it is authentic.
Yeah.
Or some other companies have been trying to do things like, okay, let me put a hologram or something like that, a mechanism by which a customer can check that and feel good about it, that it is actually a real product. Here's where blockchain, along with IoT, a simple IoT, Internet of Things, could actually be very beneficial. And you're hearing more and more pilots of that type. For example, Starbucks, is planning to kind of have these blockchain pilot implementation for their coffee, which is you go into a store and you're wanting to buy coffee. You scan that code on your Starbucks cell phone. On your Starbucks app on your cell phone.
Yeah.
And basically it gives you the complete history of that packet.
Right.
So what's happening here, it's not a completely public blockchain, obviously, right? You're not going to be able to go and change things on that.
Right.
But it gives you a peek into the story of that Starbucks coffee. So if you're particularly worried about, was this Starbucks coffee planted in a socially conscious, responsible region or not, you could check that. You could also check things like how long has it been lying around in the supply chain, right? So sometimes, there's long lead times and there is inventory just stays in the supply chain, and you're getting these products and they've been in the supply chain for a month or so. And that, so customer can check on those kinds of things. Now, this is an example of providing traceability in the value chain. Now, this does not necessarily deal with counterfeiting, right? So this is traceability. So there's one benefit of blockchains is traceability. But counterfeiting, another approach, is it is being mostly used in high value items, right? So diamonds, for example, right?
Yeah.
So diamonds, oftentimes, particularly when you're buying diamonds, expensive diamonds, you want to make sure that this was not a blood diamond. This is a big concern for people. Right? So some companies are now putting blockchain implementation or traceabilities around, just being able to, verify if this diamond is coming from a right kind of mine in the right region with sustainable practices. Now, counterfeiting examples are more in pharmaceutical situations.
Yeah.
You probably know lots of drugs sold in India,
right?
For example, are fake. And so, one of the things that the Indian government, Niti Aayog, is trying to do is to kind of come up with a blockchain implementation by which, you as a customer can go and look at that product, scan that code, and all of a sudden, you know, you will know whether this is a real product or a fake product. Because real products will be properly coded, and people will take care of them. So this is one example. The other example, other place where also this is getting traction now, is in the luxury goods category, like for example Gucci bags and these types of things, where even some of the dealerships which are which are selling on the internet, most of the items sold by them are real, but some of them could be fake. Right. So those type of settings as well, the manufacturer in this particular case, the brand is implementing blockchain to send that signal to the customer, saying, "Hey, this product is real." So this paper that we are studying is basically looking at a setting where there is a manufacturer who's worried about this, and that there is a counterfeiter in the marketplace, and there's a competition between the two. The manufacturer traditionally has a traditional mechanism of pricing signaling, but in addition now has a blockchain implementation possibility. And we kind of look at, we actually characterize when the manufacturer would actually go ahead and implement blockchain, and when they should do actually price signaling with the counterfeiter.
There is an investment question, I would imagine, right?
Yes. So there is an investment question, there's a cost of implementation of blockchain, and also there's an IoT to be put on each of the items. Otherwise, blockchain in itself is not going to be enough. You need to have an IoT that will track the movement of the item through the supply chain.
So the product has to be valuable, and there is a threshold there. And I guess what you're saying is that the price signaling is not sufficiently robust to avoid counterfeiting. And it might be, like you say, in pharmaceuticals, it might also be, it might become a regulatory requirement, right? If you're getting API, active pharmaceutical ingredients manufactured somewhere, and you want to control the impurities and things like that in it quite closely.
Yes. So one of the things that we model in the paper is, the customer's reaction as well, which is, typically when we are buying these products, we have to give out some information in the form of a credit card or whatever. But we can be fairly private in that transaction, unless we really wanted to make it public. But when you go into a blockchain type of implementation, and particularly if it is a public-private blockchain, then it raises some questions in the minds of the customer that, do I want to be giving this information about myself? For example, in the Starbucks case, the only way for you to know more about the coffee is you got to use that app. And through that app, you're telling the company where you're going to be at what time, and so on and so forth. And so there is a customer privacy aspect that also we model to kind of, it's just kind of new in this paper, where we look at, the customer reluctance to maybe share that information when there is blockchain. And then the other angle that we look at is, which is looking at the NITI Aayog India example, is to say, in which case the government is actually, heavily involved in this process, is to say, does it make sense for government as a social planner to subsidize blockchain implementation by the manufacturer? And so what we find is actually there's a very interesting result in that part of the paper, is that so the other way a social planner or government can help is through enforcement. That means you have lots of police and you put a lot of effort to catch the thieves and so on and so forth, punish them. What we find is actually, providing subsidy to the manufacturer for such an implementation may have a win-win-win impact, which means the government wins, the customer wins, and the manufacturer wins as well.
So the government providing subsidy to the manufacturer implementing it, if it is if it is working, Jay, wouldn't that alone take care of the problem? Meaning, if no customer is actually buying a counterfeited product because they can actually check it, then the
Mhm.
market for counterfeiting over time should disappear, right?
Yeah, but there are some people who may want to buy a counterfeit, right? So
Okay, okay,
because the price is so low,
right, right.
even though it is deceptive, that means they don't know whether they're getting a real one or a fake one.
Yeah,
But their propensity or ability to pay
right.
the price may be limited. So they basically get the one that they get some, even if they get a epsilon positive valuation, they'll go and buy it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so before we close, Jay, I want to get your perspectives and insights into the COVID-19 shock to the global supply chain. Some of the tactical effects are already seen. Sometimes companies who have invested into fairly concentrated, brittle supply chains because they moved to a low-cost country, they tend to be very brittle in the presence of a shock. So I think they are learning that. But I want to get your perspectives on what is going to happen in the long run here to decisions made by these companies in the supply chain. These companies meaning, multinationals, who may have gotten into fairly concentrated manufacturing locations in the supply chain.
Yeah. So, it's a great question. So, yeah, if you think about supply chain, the global supply chains, and the evolution over the last 20 years, you see that actually supply chains have become more efficient,
Yeah,
and they've also become more focused,
yeah,
which means you've got lots of activity in regions which have expertise, which have lower cost structure, and then the logistics around the creation of the product and the supplying it to the customer base is being optimized also quite well.
mm,
Now, this is a good and a bad thing. Obviously, supply chains have become global and they're very successful, and then companies all know that their supply chains are their heartbeat, right? So when the supply chain stops, then their company stops, right? So um, now, so in that sense, it's been a really good journey for the last 20 years to see supply chain become a strategic part of a firm.
yeah,
And so with the COVID, I think what has happened now is that many companies are beginning to recognize or already recognize that this is, too efficient, if there's a word like too efficient, right? And what you need is resiliency,
yeah,
which is how can we bounce back rather rapidly from whatever adversity that we face.
mm,
And to build resiliency, unfortunately, doesn't happen overnight. And that's why many companies are struggling to respond effectively, is because of this reason.
yeah,
Some are doing much better than others, but many of them are still figuring out these strategies. It's hard to predict how everything will pan out, but my conjecture is that the following, right?
mm,
So we're going to see that more companies are going to look at what we call as hybrid sourcing,
yeah,
which is you would still want to have a core supplier that is highly efficient and maybe in a low cost country that that makes most of the things for you, but you also want to diversify
mm,
and have a couple of other suppliers who are closer, more responsive, have less risk, maybe less political risk. One big thing that's happened in these 20 years is that supply chains have become highly, highly concentrated in the China region
yeah,
for most products. And so, given the geopolitical way things are panning out, I think most of the senior management and supply chain managers are basically going, do we really want to be in that risk situation? And so I think in the long run, we're going to see that is going to be one big change, which is focus more on resiliency and that might come more in the form of supplier diversification. The second thing that is going to, in my opinion, happen in a rather big way because of this COVID disruption is what we were talking about earlier around data and analytics and artificial intelligence, this acceleration of digitization, right? So I think more and more across industries, firms are becoming more comfortable with the fact that, hey, I don't need a face-to-face human interaction to make a decision.
Right.
I can automate it. I can make it better. And in fact, the companies that have been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years have been the biggest winners in the last few months. You look at, a Walmart, you look at a Target, you look at an Amazon, you look at an Apple. These companies have been leading the way in terms of digitization and digital transformation of business processes. So I believe this trend is going to accelerate. And this will be another big change in terms of how supply chains are run.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The supply chains were put together when the human content in the products were reasonably high, and hence, the attractiveness to a low cost country from a human labor perspective. So from a strategic perspective, companies have, multiple choices. They could, like you say, make it hybrid, make it for flexible. They could also head down a path. I think that's what you're saying, which is let's continue to reduce the human content in the product. And at the limit, you could actually get a zero human content product, at which case, the location becomes irrelevant.
Yeah. I think the locational advantage because of labor, obviously, as you rightly pointed out, is going down rapidly, and the digitization of the processes and the information content in the processes, as opposed to the pure human element in the processes. That's the digital content is increasing, and as digital content increases, I think there is rather than a linear, there's actually an exponential possibilities in terms of productivity improvements. And so I think that is going to be really exciting in the next few years. In the next decade, if we look back, I would suspect those two, we would have seen those two effects on the global supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, the downside, it's a different topic, but I want to get your perspective on this. So, we already have very large companies in the economy. I don't know the exact numbers, but one could argue a very high percentage of the GDP is held by maybe a dozen companies today. And they are rich in cash. They have no investment constraints, and they can do all of that. And in the process, they could become more competitive. And in the process, they could wipe out any competition that might have existed pre-COVID. So post-COVID, if we had some concentration pre-COVID, we might end up with 10x that concentration post-COVID. Do you see that or no?
Yes and no. I think on one hand, I kind of agree with you that the bigger companies have all the cloud, they have all the data, they have all the optimization, they have all the money and resources, so therefore they'll wipe out the smaller players. However, there's also another effect that is happening with this digitization, and which is basically the flattening of the competition, right? So let's take 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, if you said, "Oh, I want to be an e-commerce player," right? In order to do anything like that, you would have to actually physically go ahead and set up some things, and a warehouse and a website and all these things, right? So if you had a great idea, you needed a lot of fixed investment as a small player to even get the business rolling. On the other hand, today, if you wanted to set up something like that, you basically have ability to outsource almost everything in your business model. That means the fixed cost that you need to start up a business initially is not that high, unless you are doing like something really, really profound, like, building a rocket to go to the Mars or something
Right.
like that, right?
Yeah.
If that is not the case, I think, and what that does now is that gives an incentive or an opportunity for newcomers, small players, to come into the market with disruptive innovations. Now, will they be acquired even before they get really big? Or will the things be copied really rapidly?
Yeah.
One cannot have an answer for that. But those risks obviously exist. However, the opportunity to actually make a difference is a very, very small player.
Yeah.
As long as you're not in a physical space, I think the effect that you're talking about will mostly be felt in the physical space of business models, such as retail, for example,
Right.
where I think the smaller retail players will have a terrible time in the next few years.
Yeah.
Because the bigger players are just going to eat their lunch. And now, if you're in that kind of an industry, absolutely you're going to have that problem. But if you're not in one of those industries where the physical element is just so important, I think there might be greater competition and greater opportunity for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And the outcome obviously is a function of the length of the shock. If we don't have a vaccine for a year and we have multiple waves of infections happening, it's a different story altogether. Yeah, so this has been great, Jay, and thanks so much for spending time with me, and good luck with all your work.
Well, thank you, Gail, for the opportunity to chat with you. I enjoyed it very much, and look forward to other meetings later on. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.